I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and typically every other Sunday. What's up, guys? Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. Yes, so I'm live again today. I know I said I was doing every other Sunday, but I'm actually going to be traveling starting this Thursday. I'll be going out of town, so I won't be live Thursday, Friday, or next Sunday. So that's why I'm live again this Sunday. So it is my birthday week, and I am going to go enjoy my birthday this weekend, and I'm getting out of here. Okay. I am getting out of here. I want to start off by giving shout outs to people in the chat. Shout out to CBC Voters says, happy Sunday, Sabby Sabs. Shout out to Reza says, Bobby in the lobby. Greetings, Lauren says, Shaka when the walls fell. Shout out to Dabby Dab says, hello to Lawrence, Darmok, Jalad, and Tanagra. What's going on? Golden Monarch says, if RFK Jr. is partnering with MicroStrategy / Michael Saylor or some other billionaire whale, RFK Jr. is none other than a Ponzi scammer for the rich. You guys are coming in hot today. Shout out to David says, hello, Sabby. Glad that George Galloway got elected. What will happen to his show? That is a good question. I haven't heard anything different. So as far as I know, I'm assuming he would continue his show. I don't know what the rules are in the UK in reference to whether, a politician can still have like a YouTube show or not. I know this was an issue with, what's his name? Jesse. This was an issue with Jesse, which is one of the reasons why he decided not to run for president. I remember that because he had an RT show, and that was one of the things that they said he wouldn't be able to keep that RT show. I'm not sure how it works in the UK though. Shout out to Dark Star says, hi, everyone. What's going on? Anisha says, hello, everyone from Uruguay. First time here. Shout out to the international peeps that show up in the chat. Shout out to Miguel says, peace. What's going on here? Hannah G says, this should be good. I hope so. Shout out to Freeman Pennington. RFK is an undocumented Democrat scumbag who pretends to be an independent, which is a closet Democrat scumbag. At the end of the day, he still supports abortion and the Green New Deal. Good grief, Freeman. Oh my God. Shout out to Volvo says, hey, Cookie. Greetings, Robbie says, Sabby do. Shout out to Sky Blue Jay says, hey, y'all. What's going on? Randy says, after the frigidness a couple of days ago, we have a beautiful afternoon here, Sabby family. Yeah, it's actually not that cold here today either. Interesting. Shout out to Red Six says, hello, Sabby. What's going on? Soul says, hello, fam. Happy Sunday. Much love, Sabby. Shout out to Shandokan. Good afternoon from the Bahamas. Oh, it must be so nice there. I'm pretty sure you're enjoying that weather. Oh, I would love that right now. Shout out to Eric T. Red says, Sunday fun day. Here we go. Greetings, Pineapple Justice says, good evening. What is up? Retro Gamer says, happy Sunday. And shout out to Ronwell says, hi all. We are going to go ahead and get started, ladies and gentlemen, because we have a lot to discuss tonight. Let's go ahead and give a shout out to Sabby patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. You're out here doing the damn thing, keeping the lights on around me. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies are also in the house, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Mari Rose, Kevin Howard, and Rachel Gittleson. Thank you all so much and welcome. Well, we have some things to discuss today, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go ahead and get into that thumbnail for you. Can't believe we got to go through this with Gavin Newsom again. Tonight, we are discussing the Grayzone speaks out. That is, of course, in the picture there, there's Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, and that is Ryan Grimm in the background. And we're going to get into that story there. We're also going to discuss RFK Jr. shocking update. If I were Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I would be paying very close attention to RFK Jr. So we're going to get into that discussion. Also, something really crazy that RFK Jr. decided to do. It's on Twitter. It's wild, man. Wait till I show you. It's wild. We're also going to discuss Chuck Todd in denial. Chuck Todd was recently on Meet the Press. Very funny considering he used to actually host that show. But talking about Biden's chances and the issue with Gaza, we're going to get into that. And last but not least, I'm going to discuss, Gavin Newsom is busted. Yes, I can't believe we even have to discuss Gavin Newsom's craziness here again. But yes, we do, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead and start us off right by hitting the like. That helps me with the algo. And if you are new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. Okay. Gavin Newsom. Believe it or not, Gavin Newsom is under investigation again. Unlike last time, this time it is not about the pandemic or his behavior during the pandemic. This time it actually has to deal with workers. For those who are not aware, California's minimum wage is increasing to $20 an hour this year. And apparently there are accusations against Gavin Newsom. They are accusing him of actually receiving donor benefits in exchange for excluding a particular food chain from that $20 an hour minimum wage. That food chain is Panera Bread. I'm pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with Panera. They're all over the place here. They're pretty healthy items, but he's under investigation for this right now. If this turns out to be true, I do not understand how Gavin Newsom would not face another recall. Let's go ahead and get into this story here. Again, Gavin Newsom, he is under investigation yet again.
Welcome to the show, my former boss. He's Forbes media chair, Steve Forbes. It's good to have you on, Steve. So, what do you make of this story, this breaking news? California state lawmakers now want to investigate California Governor Gavin Newsom. He reportedly gave a break, an exemption to California's new $20 minimum wage hike to his buddy, a mega donor, Greg Flynn, who owns Panera Bread chains out there. Is that fair?
Well, it's sort of, the old phrase, pay to play. This is pay to not pay. Pay the politician so you don't have to pay the workers. That guy figured out if you pay the politician, you don't have to, you can save money. It's cheaper than paying workers. And it's just so blatant. They got the unions to go along by saying, hey, this is the price of getting this through the legislature. And the thing is, he was originally opposed the rise from $16 to $20. And so Gavin Newsom said, OK, I'll make an exemption. Suddenly the guy was on board.
So this guy.
Pause here for just a second, because first of all, it wasn't 16, it was $15 an hour, or $15.50, but it wasn't 16. So just wanted to issue that correction there. But notice what he said. He said the unions went along with it. And this is another reason why I continue to say that unionization should not be the final step. The final step should be worker cooperatives. But this is another example how, again, the unions will ignore the requests of the rank and file members, and union management will do what they feel fits their pocket. Let's go on.
Hi, Greg Flynn. He's the largest restaurant franchisee in the U.S.
Yeah, he's a billionaire.
And a billionaire. It's not the world. I mean, he's got thousands of Applebee's, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, Wendy's. He's donated tens of thousands to Governor Newsom, including to fight a recall push. Now, Gavin Newsom is thought to be a stand-in, potentially, if President Biden doesn't run again. It doesn't look like right now. But do you think this is damaging to Gavin Newsom?
Well, we'll see if he has the kind of a Trump shield.
So let's pause for a second. This gentleman right here. So he owns Panera Bread. He is a billionaire. And notice what they just told you. He also helped Gavin Newsom during his recall. Remember when Gavin Newsom had the recall because he actually didn't follow his own rules in reference to the lockdowns, and he decided to go out to eat in public when he told other people to stay home. And they caught him at the French Laundry, not following the same rules that he set for residents in California. And Gavin Newsom had that recall. Now he won the recall, but now here we are again with another investigation. So this gentleman here, who's a billionaire, has apparently helped Gavin Newsom before during that recall. So it's almost like you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. So since he helped Gavin Newsom, now he's looking for Gavin Newsom to help him. And you know who suffers? The workers.
This is damaging to Gavin Newsom?
Well, we'll see if he has the kind of a Trump shield where something comes along that you don't like, but your supporters are still there. I don't think it's going to be the case with Gavin Newsom. And the question is, when does Biden get pulled out, and how are they going to pick his replacement? Newsom is the front runner, biggest state in the union, and as you alluded to, big money gatherer. Big money out there goes for him, so he'll be able to help fund the campaign. And so the fact of the matter is, Gavin Newsom is the front runner, and who else is going to challenge him? Governor Whitmer of Michigan.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that could happen is the Democrats may go for a completely unknown. Somebody with no baggage, like Jimmy Carter back in 1976.
Interesting.
And that way, they hope, being an unknown, you can beat Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, this is really...
So this is also interesting, too. Remember, there have been talks or rumblings of Gavin Newsom possibly replacing Joe Biden. Now, Gavin Newsom has denied that, but Gavin Newsom he's been known to be caught in lies. Like, it's not the first time. You also have to know that Gavin Newsom is also related to Nancy Pelosi by marriage. So we're talking about, again, another political dynasty here. There's also stories that her daughter is going to take her spot at some point as well in the House of Representatives. There's been rumblings about that for quite some time. But once again, this shows you just how big money and big money interests control these politicians.
Damaging to Gavin Newsom, but he's trying to play it down, as just, sausage making and making the laws. But
it was Bismarck who said two things polite people shouldn't see: lawmaking and sausage making. And they go right together.
Yeah, it sure does. So, the governor told reporters, well, I'm just, just ignore this. This is just part of politics. Let's listen to what Gavin Newsom said when he was confronted about this late last year. Watch.
There's a provision in this bill that exempts bakeries, essentially places that sell and bake bread on site. So carving out essentially Panera and Boudin. I wonder, I mean, why in the agreement did you all decide that those workers should not be within the umbrella of this?
I mean, that's part of.
Okay, so this was September 28th of 2023. So they had questioned him about this before when they talked about the minimum wage in California increasing to $20 an hour.
The sausage making that was part of 257, the original bill, and we went back and forth, and there was part of the negotiation. It's the nature of negotiation.
Wait a minute. That's complete nonsense because McDonald's is not exempt. They're going to get hit every franchise location, something like $250,000 in extra costs. And forgive me. Yeah. There's also more. It's Chipotle. All the fast food chains are going to get hit, but not Panera Bread because Panera Bread's owner gave tens of thousands of dollars to Gavin Newsom's campaign. He's a mega donor. He's a high school classmate too. The National Restaurants Association chief is now advising, fast food chain owners, listen, you need to have political relationships.
Well,
okay. Does everybody see how this works now? He was a donor for Gavin Newsom's campaign. Now, I want to break this down a little bit more in reference to why Panera was exempt. Now, they tried to use the excuse that because Panera Bread has an actual bakery and they bake their own bread or something like that, that those businesses were supposed to be excluded. But also, obviously, if that gentleman donated money to your campaign, of course, you're going to try to find an excuse to come up with so that Panera would be exempt, because that's exactly what the billionaire wanted. That's what the billionaire class does. I told you before, they are more powerful than the politicians. They are above the politicians. And this is another reason why you have to get corporate money out of electoral politics, because the politicians just do their bidding.
Just goes to show. Pay to play or pay to not pay. In this case, not pay your workers. And the fact of the matter is, in terms of this whole thing, is what California is doing is completely unconstitutional. They've now set up a special board to dictate to restaurants how they manage their restaurants, what they pay their workers, working hours and things like that. Absolutely wrong, going to be thrown out by the courts.
Yeah, this is going to be wild to see. This story's got legs. It's really hitting Gavin Newsom hard. Thank you so much, Steve, my boss. It's my forward.
Okay, let's go into a little bit more detail here. Oh, Eric, I can't exit out of here. Somehow the thing got too big or too. Can you exit me out of this? Thank you. Okay, let's go into this a little bit deeper because The Guardian actually provided more details here. Absurd. Gavin Newsom hits back over Panera wage exemption puzzle. So he did respond. Gavin Newsom is hitting back at a news report that he pushed for an exemption to the state's new fast food minimum wage law that benefits a wealthy campaign donor. California's minimum wage is $16 per hour. Oh, I guess it is 16. Sorry, I thought it was 15. But starting on April 1st, of course, on April Fool's Day, most fast food restaurants in the state must pay their workers at least $20 an hour under legislation that Newsom signed. However, the law does not apply to restaurants that have on-site bakeries and sell bread as a standalone menu item. That is such a weird exemption, don't you guys think? Okay, that exception puzzled some industry watchers and was never fully explained by Newsom or other supporters of the law. Then on Wednesday, Bloomberg News reported that the exemption was linked to the opposition from the Panera Bread franchisee, Greg Flynn, whose company owns 24 other restaurants in California and has donated to Newsom's campaigns. This story is absurd, says California Governor spokesman Alex Stack on Thursday. Stack said that the governor's legal team believes Panera Bread is not exempt from the law. They said that to be exempt from the minimum wage law as a bakery, restaurants must produce bread for sale on site. The governor's office said that many chain bakeries, such as Panera Bread, mix dough at a centralized off-site location and then ship that dough to the restaurant for baking and sale. Since last year, Panera Bread has been reported as a restaurant exempt from the law, and Newsom's office has not said otherwise, even when the governor was directly asked why the chain was exempt. A message left with Panera Bread about their baking process was not immediately returned. Stack said the governor never met with Flynn about the law. A message left with the Flynn group was not returned on Thursday. Flynn told Bloomberg he did not play a role in crafting exemptions. So again, think about this, for example. Bloomberg tends to be more liberal, right? That's more of a liberal outlet for the most part in reference to news, right? So they're the ones who broke this story. And Gavin Newsom is a Democrat. So just keep that in mind. The Bloomberg story, citing anonymous sources, says Flynn urged the governor's top aides to consider whether chains such as Panera should be considered fast food. It does not say that Gavin Newsom and Flynn spoke directly about the law. The Flynn Group and Flynn Properties operate 2,600 restaurants and fitness centers across 44 states. That's according to the company's website. Campaign finance records show Flynn Properties and Greg Friend, the owner, chairman, and chief executive, have donated more than $220,000 to Newsom's political campaigns. That's since 2017. That included a $100,000 donation to Newsom's campaign to defeat a recall attempt in 2021. So here's the thing, folks. You don't receive a donation of that size without some strings attached. So if this guy has donated over $200,000 to Gavin Newsom's campaign, of course, Gavin Newsom is going to have to do something in return for him. Just like when we talk about Big Pharma. Big Pharma doesn't donate to politicians and expect them to vote for Medicare for all. Think about that. The minimum wage law passed in 2023. In 2022, Flynn had publicly opposed a similar proposal, writing in an op-ed in Capital Weekly that it would effectively kill the franchise business model in the state. So he means for him. He means that it would hurt him, just FYI. Republican leaders in the state legislature on Thursday criticized Newsom for the possible connection. Put simply, campaign contributions should not buy carve-outs in legislation. That comes from the Republican state senator, Brian Jones. It's unacceptable. Yeah, but both parties do this. Both parties do it, whether it's Republican, whether it's Democrat. They take corporate money, they accept corporate donations, and in return, it does impact legislation. That's why they donate to you. They're not donating to you so that you can vote against what they want. They donate to you so that you can vote for what they want. So the fact that you have this coming from Brian Jones, who's in the opposition party, it's ludicrous, because Brian knows this is exactly how politics works in this country. So just keep that in mind. Assembly member James Gallagher, the Republican leader in the assembly, said that Attorney General Rob Bonta or another entity responsible for investigating conflicts of interest should look into the matter. This exemption, there is no explanation for it. Someone had to push for it. The law was authored by Assembly member Chris Holden, a Democrat from Pasadena, who told reporters on Thursday he was not involved in the negotiations over the bill's final amendments, which included the $20 minimum wage increase and the exemption for bakeries. He said those talks happened between business community and labor unions. Groups Holden said were brought together through the governor's leadership. So here's another thing we need to mention here. This goes to show you that once again, the Democratic Party has a stronghold with unions. They have bought their way into unions. And this is why a lot of times I believe union management goes against the rank and file members. So let's think about this, folks. because I don't believe there would be an investigation against Gavin Newsom if they didn't have enough evidence to point this back to him. Gavin Newsom takes money from a billionaire, and in return, one of the restaurants, the franchises that billionaire just happens to own, is exempt from the $20 an hour minimum wage that is happening in California this year. That's not a coincidence. And for people who may say that is too much money, $20 an hour for minimum wage, I'm going to show you why it's not too much money and why it's actually not enough. Gavin Newsom, who claims to be a pro-worker or cares about the workers, is effectively working against the workers and working for the billionaires. It doesn't matter if they have a D or R in front of their name. At the end of the day, they're all bought and paid for. Now, last year, I showed you the out of reach report, and we had a little fun on this show. We went to different states on this site to show you how much you actually need to make for housing in your state. California is the most expensive state. And according to California, show this real quick. According to, this is the out of reach housing report. This is by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. This report is released every year in July. So this year, we'll go over the 2024 report. In California, this is the crazy part. Again, number one, most expensive here for housing. Okay? So for a 1-bedroom rental in California, I'll make this bigger for you. For a 1-bedroom rental in California, just 1 bedroom, according to the out of reach report, you actually need to earn $33.97 an hour. That's just for 1 bedroom. For a studio, you need to earn $30.11 an hour. And for a 2-bedroom, you need to earn $42.25 an hour. So for, let's just say we're trying to be we're trying to go a lot as cheap as we can here, right? So let's say we are just trying to get a studio apartment in California. You need to make $30.11 an hour. So the $20 an hour minimum wage, which will take effect this year in California, that's not even the bare minimum that you need to make to get a studio. And you have Gavin Newsom scratching his billionaire buddy's back so that the employees at Panera Bread won't get that $20 minimum wage. People think it's a lot. People will hear that and they're like, that's ridiculous for minimum wage. Do you know how expensive it is to live in California? So this report, this is why I continue to keep this on deck. Because right now in California, the minimum wage, last year was $15.50. Now it's $16, right? But if you are making the minimum wage, which is like that $15.50-ish / $16 an hour, you have to work 88 hours a week to afford a 1-bedroom rental. This is the world we live in, folks. This is the United States of America. This is how expensive it has become now. And if you go view the state on the map, we had fun with this last year, didn't we, guys? You could just hover over and it shows you for the 2-bedroom. California is ranked number 1 for the highest housing wage in the United States today. So to get a 2-bedroom, you need to make $42.25 an hour. If you wanted a 2-bedroom and you're making minimum wage, you would have to work 109 hours a week. The American dream is gone, folks. This is why this report is so important. Eric, can you put the link to this in the chat so people can play with this at home as well and check what it is for their state? This is why this is so important. So the people right now that are calling for RFK Jr., for example, part of his policy is to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We're past that. We're past that. And Gavin Newsom should be ashamed of himself for going against the workers. No wonder so many people are leaving your state, Gavin. That report is the Out of Reach 2023 Cali report. Eric put the link for you guys in the chat, and I'll make sure I pin that to the comment section as well so that you guys can look at that on your own time. But Gavin Newsom should be ashamed of himself. Shout out to Sean Miller for becoming a Sabby member or being a Sabby member for 2 months. Thank you for what you do. Thank you so much. And shout out to Yantra, who says peace, who's also been a member for 1 month, actually. Thank you for the super chat, P. Smith. Happy birthday. May all your wishes come true. Thank you. My birthday is Friday, but thank you for the early birthday wish. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Already ordered your birthday present. Hope to be here by Friday. Oh my God, you don't have to get me anything, Roger. No, you don't have to get me anything. I'm curious now, though. I'm curious what this would be. Thank you, Old Crow. Finally caught a Sabby live. To think my adventure into all of this started with seeing you interviewed by BJG, who I was watching for Aliens/UAPS. Oh, thank you. And shout out to Suzanne. Great work you're doing, Sabby and team. Thanks, Suzanne. Oh, Suzanne Murphy. Thank you. And thank you for the super chat, M. Smith. Be living in a crime-ridden area on $30 an hour in California. Yeah, I've heard that from people. I've heard that. And he wonders why people keep leaving California. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you so much. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. This is the dumbest thing Panera Group could do. What do they think will happen when their Panera Bread employees see they're getting $11 an hour and they go anywhere else and get $20 an hour? Panera Bread will realize that exemption doesn't mean jack. That's a good point. Very good point. They can go pick up a job easily somewhere else. Somewhere else that is paying that $20 an hour. Ay. All right. We are going to do a quick shout out. Yes, I think I did my shout out here. Yes, it is Sunday. So we're doing shout out Sundays. All right. I did this a while back and I want to continue to do this, shouting out like news or segments that I've seen for independent media. I'm only going to shout out independent that I think you guys should check out. If you get the opportunity, check out JB Font's channel. JB Font is one of my comrades over at Revolutionary Blackout Network. He also has his own channel. He actually did a panel and I listened to this yesterday. And it's called Why Americans Should Support Reparations. I highly recommend that you watch that discussion. I know some of you reached out to me a couple times via email and asked me more. You've been asking me more questions about reparations. I highly recommend that you watch that panel that JB did because they really go through a lot of it and break those things down. So shout out to JB here for that panel. Go check it out. Now we're moving on to the Chuck. So it's interesting. Chuck Todd, it was announced last year that he was leaving Meet the Press. Well, he was actually back on Meet the Press, but this time as the guest. So it's just weird. It's weird because the entire time I was watching this, I'm like, you used to be sitting in that chair. But he was back on Meet the Press to discuss Biden showing in the Michigan primary and what he thinks is going to happen in the general election from here. I'm actually going to debunk some of the things that Chuck Todd said in this interview, because there's a couple of things I noticed that he did not mention that I just read a couple of days ago that I think you guys might want to see. So let's go ahead and get into this segment here. This is Meet the Press, and Chuck Todd is not the host. He is the guest.
Joining me now on set to discuss all of the big stories in politics is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So let's start off by talking about Michigan. You could argue there are warning signs for both parties in Michigan, but let's talk about Democrats, because I think that's kind of where most of the focus has been. You have these 100,000 uncommitted votes. You and I spoke about this earlier. You said you were watching to see if it got up to 30%. Didn't get that high, but still not insignificant.
I think it really depends. If you portray it as 100,000 votes, it sounds more significant than if you say they didn't win a single delegate.
Yeah.
Right.
Pause. Okay, so this is Chuck Todd being disingenuous, and she's being disingenuous too. 100,000 uncommitted votes in Michigan. When I covered this last week, one of the things I explained to you is that, yes, there have always been protest votes in Michigan during the primary. However, there has not been one since we went all the way back to 2008, I think, not been one since going back to 2008 that has been this high. Not for Obama's reelection, not even for Trump's reelection. Over 100,000 people voted uncommitted. So this is Chuck Todd's job, to carry weight for the Democratic Party. So he's trying to reassure Democrat voters and Biden supporters that everything is fine, that it's not significant. And they already, let the cat out the bag when they actually mentioned, I think it was on MSNBC, that they're not even going to focus on those voters anyway. The plan is for the Biden administration to focus on the suburban areas in Michigan. So they're going to go after the soccer moms just like they did in the Atlanta suburbs in 2020. So they don't care about the people that are working class. They don't care about the people that are calling for a ceasefire. They're not going to entertain these people at all. They're going to focus on the suburban areas, and that's what they're hoping to win. But there is a problem, and I'll get to that in just a second. Let me let him continue here.
Didn't make threshold of 15%, right? So it really, I think a lot of it has to do with, it's like, I don't want to take anything away from the activists and their passion on what the message that they wanted to send. But if you're the Biden campaign and you're just looking at this through a political lens, this could have been a lot worse. This could have been, this was a free vote. Bernie Sanders' organization was helping. You had Beto O'Rourke. So I look at all of this sort of somewhat institutional support that the protesters got, including from at least one sort of news organization, and they still only got, So I think that to a certain community, this is really highly important. But I think it's contained as a political problem. This could have metastasized. I sort of look at it the same way I look at the New Hampshire write-in effort.
Let me pause for a second. Notice how he said it's contained, right? So the 100,000 uncommitted votes, it's not contained. The uncommitted campaign is spreading across the country. Pennsylvania has already launched their own abandoned Biden campaign, their own uncommitted campaign. I just saw something earlier today. This is from the Boston PSL chapter. They're telling people also to vote uncommitted in Massachusetts. So it's actually not contained, Chuck. And also, why are you saying contained as though this is a virus? We've contained it. We've stopped it from spreading. That's what Chuck thinks.
All the ingredients were there to really embarrass Biden. All the ingredients in Michigan were there to embarrass him. And just the opposite happened. They not only contained it in some ways, he showed far more strength than I expected. So that's, I'm trying to, I don't want to somehow say, the protest movement, came up short. I just think there are certain people this might be a voting issue for, but it's a much smaller group of voters than I think many people realize.
Yeah, and it didn't mean.
This is really interesting because as I'm watching this, like I said before, when I first saw this, he used to be in that chair, So it's like, to me, it's weird that he's the guest on this show. And it reminded me, I was thinking of this song my dad used to play called Used to Be My Girl. You guys ever heard the song? It's like an old school, used to be my girl, used to be my girl. And I was sitting there, I was watching this and I was like, Chuck is sitting there thinking, that used to be his chair. Used to be my chair. Used to be my chair.
That 30% mark that
Or
you
50,
were
well, that to me
watching
is because we've seen 20% in the past.
Right,
This is a
right,
free vote.
right.
You got into the 30s, that's a whole different story. Then you have a third of the party. This is why Nikki Haley being in the 30s is a much bigger
We'll
deal
talk
to
about
Donald
that.
Trump.
I mean, how big of a deal are these numbers for Trump? How big of a warning sign in a general election? The fact that in some of these states, he's missing out on 40% of the voters.
Well, and look,
Pause here. So another thing I want to mention too that they conveniently left out, Dean Phillips still got over like 20,000 votes in Michigan. Marianne Williamson got more votes than Dean Phillips did, and she wasn't even, this was after she suspended her campaign. And then she decided to unsuspend it. But they're not even mentioning that though. They're just looking at Biden received 81% in the primary. But again, that's in the primary. That doesn't mean he's going to perform that way in the general. In fact, I'm going to show you that he's not, according to the numbers right now.
I think Trump actually should feel a little bit better about his performance in Michigan. I mean, she didn't get 40.
Right.
In fact, she got under 30 this time.
Yeah.
And to me, Michigan, again, talk about a state that was designed for her to do well in, right? Open primary, the rules were allowed. I actually think the Democrats who decided to stay voting in the Democratic primary probably hurt Haley a little bit.
Look at this, guys. So let me tell you what they're doing. So Chuck Todd, he's actually focusing on, he's saying that Nikki Haley's 26.5% is actually more significant than the 100,000 people that voted uncommitted against Joe Biden. You see how he made that pivot? Just pivot. Just like that. Okay. So here's the problem, folks. Nikki Haley hasn't won one state. Not one. Nikki Haley doesn't even have a Republican base. That's another thing. She didn't capture a base of the party. Donald Trump still has the largest base of that party, right? Also, why is he mentioning that her 26.5% is significant? But if you take what Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson received in Michigan, which is more than this, when you put them together, that's not significant. Or actually, not more than that, but still. They're not even talking about that. They're not even mentioning it at all. Now, we know there's no pathway forward for either of them, but he's pretending like there's still a pathway forward for Nikki Haley in the Republican Party, and we know there isn't. She hasn't won one state.
You think of it, if she got the same amount of Democratic crossover into the Michigan Republican primary that she got in New Hampshire, my guess is she is in the high 30s or low 40s. But these are Republicans who already know he's going to be the nominee, who already know she can't win the nomination, who are still wanting to show up to the poll to vote against Trump. And once you do.
No, those are not Republicans. You see, this is why we have to debunk mainstream media's narrative. As I've shown you on the show multiple times before, the majority of people voting for Nikki Haley are not Republicans. We saw that with New Hampshire. We've seen this with South Carolina. The majority of the Republicans are obviously voting for Donald Trump. Nikki Haley has captured a lot of independents. She's also captured some Democrats. There are some Democrats voting for Nikki Haley because they don't want Donald Trump to win the primary. But here's Chuck Todd just openly lying to you.
Once you vote against Trump once, it's easy to keep voting against him.
Right.
It's a little bit harder. So I think when you look at these two situations, it's not even a close call. Trump's got a much bigger problem than Biden. And going into this, I wasn't 100% sure. My gut was that this wasn't going to be what some people thought it was on the left. And it turned out to be what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
I think it's also disingenuous for him to say that Trump has a much bigger problem than Joe Biden. No, Joe Biden is the incumbent president, and his approval rating is lower than Obama's was when he ran for re-election. It's lower than Trump's was when he ran for re-election. Joe Biden is the one that has the biggest problem right now. There's also the fact that I told you before, this uncommitted campaign is not contained just to Michigan, as he told you it was. It's also rising up in Pennsylvania. I saw messages today from Massachusetts. This is going to spread into other states. So Chuck Todd sitting here and pretending like Joe Biden does not have a problem, he's lying to you. But this is what Chuck is paid to do.
One of your obsessions, my obsessions, what's going to happen with a third party candidate. You have a great column out. I'm going to read a little bit of it. You're basically saying the wind has come out of the sails for a third party candidate. You write, the debate over abortion access is something that's always been debated within the frame of the two parties. If abortion is the issue for a large chunk of swing voters, then they aren't going to be interested in a third party's compromise position, no matter what that position is. If abortion is a voting issue for someone, they'll have a definitive position on which party they want making reproductive health laws and appointing judges. The case for a third-party alternative for this election cycle is over. There's just not a market for it, given the current issue terrain. And I'll add one more note. You have big names like Joe Manchin and Larry Hogan who are out of the mix. Right. So there's not really a candidate.
No, there's not. And I go back.
Here they are lying again. Okay. What do the polls show you? Okay. Number one, not everyone has abortion as their number one issue. In fact, most Americans that were polled say the economy is their number one issue. The economy, imagine that. This is the first time I've seen where foreign policy is in the top 3. Abortion is not in the top 2. So the Democratic Party, they are banking on the abortion issue to help Joe Biden become reelected in November. Here's the problem, though. Yes, a lot of female voters may look at that as something like, oh my God, I got to go out there and I got to vote for the Democrats because I don't want to, I want them to fix the abortion issue. But some of the people that I've been talking to actually on the ground, they said, well, the Supreme Court already kicked it back to the states. My state's fine. They didn't change any rules here in my state. I'm fine. And then there's also the fact that for people who live in a ballot initiative state, some of these states have already put forth ballot measures to make sure that the women keep their right to choose in their state. We saw this with Kansas. That's not a blue state. So I don't think the abortion issue is going to work the way that the Democratic Party thinks it's going to work. That may have helped them during the midterms. But now, again, when you look at the polls, the number one issue for voters is the economy, not abortion. What a mess.
Back to, one of the whole pitches of No Labels is, hey, we want to sort of like turn the temperature down and find some middle ground. Right now in abortion, you're either for access or you want to restrict access.
He said for abortion, you either for access or you want to restrict access. Now, why can't he apply that same method to genocide? Because I would say you're either for genocide or against genocide. Who's the one that's aiding the genocide? That's Joe Biden. See, this is where they get into trouble. I don't think that Joe Biden is going to have the support from young voters the way that he did in 2020. I don't think that's going to happen. And I already have seen numbers that show he's not going to get the support from the African-American community the way that he did in 2020. So what they're going to do is they're going to bank on white suburban moms to pull Joe Biden across the finish line. But I don't know if that's going to be enough for him this time around.
We're not in a debate about weeks right now. That isn't the conversation. This is a different conversation. IVF has sort of brought that into the fold here. So right now, that's where if abortion was considered settled, sort of the way same-sex marriage is, and I know that certain advocates are worried that it could get revisited, but it's for a lion's share of the electorate, it's settled. Yeah. So okay, that wouldn't be a concern of it. Can you imagine? No Labels trying to come up with a ticket that one is for access to abortion and one is against access to abortion. It just doesn't, there's no There is no scenario to me that this makes any sense if abortion is as urgent of an issue as it is, and it is.
And just to put a fine point on.
To who? See, this is where I feel like they are out of touch with the everyday worker, the everyday American. It's an urgent issue for who? If you were to poll women and you poll men, is abortion an urgent issue for men? Are they going to put that as their number one issue? I don't even think some of the women would put that as their number one issue right now. This is what happens when you don't hit the streets and talk to people on the ground. Everyone that I have spoken to said they are more concerned about the economy. They're more concerned about putting food on the table. They're more concerned about the expensive grocery prices. That's the number one thing that people are saying. Nobody has come to me and has said to me their number one issue is abortion. And that includes women that I've spoken to. This is all the narrative control. This is what they want you to believe. They want you to think this is the number one urgent issue for everybody. It's not. We'll go on just a little bit more here, and then I'm going to show you some numbers.
If we weren't in a post-Roe world, there could potentially still be a lane for a third party.
I completely agree,
Yeah.
but I really think that abortion, because the voters know, hey, this is the jersey color matters here,
Right.
and who appoints these judges, who makes these laws. This is one of those, the voters are pretty educated here, and I think they know that the third party actually distracts from this specific issue.
Yeah. Well, it will be fascinating to watch. Chuck,
All right.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Kristen.
Thank you. Read.
That used to be my chair. Chuck is saying that used to be his chair. But listen, it's really interesting to me that they're continuing to spread this lie. Because the reality is they're hoping that American voters, particularly Democrat voters, are going to feel threatened about the abortion issue, and that's going to push people out to the polls. That's what they're hoping will happen. And I believe the Democratic Party actually had that card in their back pocket for this day. They kept that in their back pocket. Listen, Roe v. Wade could have been codified under Bill Clinton, under Barack Obama. Barack Obama said it would be the first thing that he would do. And then when he was elected, he changed his mind. He said he couldn't do it because of Lieberman, but he could have ended the filibuster. These are all excuses. These are all excuses. Chris says, you're exactly right, Sabs. They are trying to appeal to the professional managerial class who are typically neo-libs. Right. I'm telling you, the people that they're trying to reach like those suburban moms. Eric, can you exit me out of, I don't know why I can't exit out. Oh, there it is. Okay. I think I just made it too big. I don't know what I did. Anyhow, I want to show you some of the numbers because this is what they're not showing you. But thankfully, we have case study QB. Because you see, right now, okay, they're talking about the primary, right? The Michigan poll for 2024 for the general election has Donald Trump at 45% and Joe Biden at 41%. Okay. And they know abortion is on the table, but this just backs up what I said before, which is that for a lot of people that I have spoken to, abortion is not the number one urgent issue. It's the economy. Why do you guys think Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden in all these swing states? In all the swing states. So Chuck Todd isn't going to show you this. When he's bragging about the 81% or whatever that Joe Biden got in Michigan, and he's trying to make it sound like those 100,000 uncommitted votes are insignificant and that it's contained or whatever, that's the primary, man. He's not telling you what the numbers show for the general election for Michigan. Just between Trump and Biden. So keep in mind, this is not including RFK or Jill Stein or Cornel West, any of the third party candidates. Those numbers change and more pulls away from Biden once you add them in as well. And here's another problem they're not telling you about. Wavering Black voters. Biden is flawed and Trump is unacceptable. So here's another thing that Chuck Todd is leaving out. Months of polling have shown a segment Black voters a key part of Biden's base, souring on his performance and growing more open to voting against the Democrat than in any recent presidential election. They are more open to voting against the Democrat more than any recent presidential election. But Chuck Todd leaves that out. The Democrat candidate cannot win without the Black vote. The Republican Party doesn't have to worry about that. They're going to win with or without the Black vote. The Democratic Party, however, cannot win without the Black vote. And they know that. So don't you think it's a little strange that Chuck sat there and he's leaving this information out and he's making it seem like everybody's going to come out and support Joe Biden in the end anyway, because abortion is the urgent issue. It goes on to say here, let's go down to because they did a focus group. In a head-to-head matchup between Biden and Trump, only one of the 14 focus group participants affirmatively said they'd back Trump. But when the ballot was expanded to include RFK, Cornel West, Jill Stein, 2 said they'd vote for Kennedy, and 1 each chose West and Stein. The result echoed some recent polling. The NBC News poll showed that 75% of Black registered voters saying they'd support Biden in 2024. Now, let me pause there. I just want to highlight that part right there. Oh, I guess I can't highlight this. Oh, well. I guess I can't highlight on this site. Oh, yeah, I can do on CBS. Anyway, 75% of Black voters said they'd support Joe Biden in 2024. Okay. All right. Let me tell you why that's a problem. Joe Biden had over 80, I think it was 83-ish% of the Black vote in 2020. Donald Trump's percentage with the Black community has increased since 2020. 16% said they'd back Trump. Similar results to past NBC News surveys and other polls. That represents a dip among the group from 2020, 85, when 85% of Black voters surveyed said they'd back Biden, and 7% said they'd back Donald Trump. So some of the Black voters who supported Joe Biden in 2020 have moved over to supporting Donald Trump. How do you lose? And I want to make a comparison to Barack Obama. How do you lose 10% of the Black support? And it might even be lower than that. He went from 85% to 75% now. Okay, let's make the comparison with Barack Obama. Obama did not have that type of a dip. If I remember correctly, I believe Barack Obama got 95% of the Black vote. And during re-election, it was like 92, 93%. He didn't lose 10%. And Obama didn't do anything really for Black people. And Black wealth tanked under Barack Obama's presidency. So, Joe, you know, you really made some people upset. You really pissed some people off. It goes on to say here, it says the majority think that Trump is racist. Indeed, the group views on Trump were stark, particularly after the participants were shown recent comments the former president made last weekend at an event for Black conservatives. Trump pointed to his criminal indictments and said, that's why Black people like me, because they viewed me as I'm being discriminated against. And I pushed back on that last week. And I told you guys that is not what Black people have been saying. What they had said is that they feel like it's a witch hunt, right? None of the participants said Trump understood the concerns of Black Americans, and 9 of the 14 said he is racist. But here's the thing. The people that they spoke to in that focus group, we're not to say that they're going to support Donald Trump. What is more likely to happen is that they are going to stay home. And here's another thing. that Chuck Todd so conveniently left out that everybody needs to see. The choice for president among African American voters. It's a damn shame. Joe Biden should be embarrassed. Here's another poll. This is the Quinnipiac poll. Biden has 56% among African American voters. Donald Trump, 15%. RFK Jr., 13%. And Cornel West, 13%. So this is why I continue to push back on the narrative from mainstream media, because these numbers are very telling. Joe Biden has lost, where are my math people in the chat? 15, 13, 13, 26, 26 and 15. Looking at almost 40 something percent. A little over 40%. When you total up Donald Trump, RFK, and Cornel West percent of the black vote. Now that's assuming that things stay the same and nobody drops out of the race. We don't know what's going to happen. But I'm willing to argue if RFK Jr. drops out, which I don't think he's going to, based on what I'm going to show you with the next story. If RFK Jr. drops out, I would assume a lot of these voters would go over towards Donald Trump or maybe the Libertarian candidate. If Cornel West drops out, some of these voters will go over to Joe Biden, and I think the others will stay home. So Joe Biden does have a reason to be concerned, unlike what Chuck Todd told you. Remember, they're paid to paint that narrative. He's not going to get on there and say Joe Biden is in trouble. Like he's not going to say that, right? But the numbers don't lie, dude. The numbers don't lie. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. The mighty, mighty OJ Sabs. Good music. Thank you. Thank you, Sherelle. I just voted uncommitted all over my California ballot, except for Barbara Lee, who supports a ceasefire. See, I told you guys, it's not just Michigan. Team Orca says, Sabby, my aunt slept with Chuck Todd in high school. What? No. Oh my God. Apnark says, Sabby, are you going to talk about the girl assaulted at Jill Biden event recently for asking for a ceasefire? I think I was going to talk more about that on Tuesday because I'm connecting that with another story. But yeah, I did tweet that out though. I retweeted that. Thank you for the super chat, B-Man. Don't forget Obama could have signed Freedom of Choice Act, but he didn't. Also, Biden could have codified Roe, but he did not. Exactly. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Based. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Chuck, abortion is not a priority for Dems. If it were, then Joe would have codified it into law January 2 years ago, when the memo from Sam Alito's office was leaked on how they were going to rule on it. Their second chance was after the decision, kicking it back to the states. They still didn't do it. Number one issue, economy. More specifically, cost of living too. Too high, paychecks too low. Cost of living too high, paychecks too low. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I think a lot of you know this, right? Like, you guys know, if you talk to the average voter, the average voter is telling you that that's not their number one issue. Not their number one issue. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. Thank you very much. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. And we're getting to the RFK Jr. story, and I'm just going to start off by saying this. Based on what I just saw and what I'm about to show you, if I were running for president for 2024, I would be very, very, very concerned about RFK Jr. If you are trying to win I would be very, very concerned about RFK Jr. So I'm going to show you why. I told you that RFK Jr. had ballot access in Utah, but now the game has changed. And I don't even support RFK presidency. Me and him don't align on the Israel issue. We don't align on some of his financial issues either, but that's a whole other story. We've talked about that before on the show. But this just happened. Super PAC supporting RFK says it has gathered enough signatures to put him on the ballot in Arizona and Georgia. Let me tell you why people need to be concerned if you're running for president. Arizona is pretty much like a purple state now, right? Used to be a red state, but Biden won in 2020, and now people are like, it's a purple state, right? So it can go either way, a toss up. Remember, Joe Biden was able to win Arizona because a lot of independents voted for Joe Biden. Then we have the state of Georgia. Joe Biden won Georgia because they went out and they pulled the suburban moms. Remember, we talked about this. They got them to come out and support Joe Biden, particularly in the Atlanta suburbs, right? Fulton County. If RFK Jr. is on the ballot in Arizona and in Georgia, I don't think Joe Biden would win Arizona. And I also don't think he would win Georgia, which I was skeptical that he would win Georgia again anyway. I still don't think that Georgia is a blue state. I wish people would stop calling it that. I don't think it's a swing state. I still think Georgia is a red state, having lived there. I just think that people in Georgia just did not want Donald Trump again. So a lot of them came out to heavily vote against Donald Trump, not necessarily for Joe Biden. But now we've had both. We've had Trump and we've had Joe Biden. And again, the number one issue that people have is the economy. So that being said, this is a big deal. So he's gathered enough signatures to get on the ballot in Arizona and in Georgia. It says American Values 2024 said in a news release they have gathered the necessary signatures to secure ballot access for Kennedy in Arizona and Georgia, two states that helped President Joe Biden defeat Donald Trump in 2020 by very narrow margins. So let's not forget that. We can't sit here and pretend like Biden won Arizona and Georgia by large numbers. He did not. It was close. The grassroots energy and momentum give us more confidence than ever in our ability to knock out the remaining states on our list of states quickly. That's coming from the PAC co-founder, Tony Lyons. While Kennedy's long shot bid is unlikely to garner enough support to win in November, his appearance on the ballot in pivotal swing states could reshuffle the electoral dynamics in a potential rematch between Biden and Trump. Biden defeated Trump by less than half a percentage point in Arizona and Georgia. So everybody hold on to that. He beat Donald Trump by less than half a percentage point in those two states. Now, something else that's not mentioned here, but I'll mention it as well. The Green Party is also on the ballot in Arizona this time around. In 2020, the Green Party did not have ballot access in Arizona. This time they do. Yes, even. Kennedy is currently on the ballot in one state, Utah, and his campaign has gathered enough signatures to appear on the ballot in New Hampshire and Hawaii. So there was a recent interview with RFK Jr. I want to go ahead and jump into that. This was on Fox News. It's titled, I think somebody else is making decisions in the White House. Let's go ahead and get started with this one here.
Conversation with independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from his battle to get on the ballot in more states, the accusations that he is a spoiler candidate, and what he would do about what he says is the crisis at the border. He has been there twice in recent months.
So you're on 3 state ballots right now.
How are you going to get on the others? I know you've started your own We the People party, and then there's a libertarian area where you could get on ballots in that way as well. What's the plan and how quickly will it happen?
We're going to be announcing new states every week from now on. We're way ahead of our benchmarks. We will be on the ballot in 50 states and the District of Columbia. We have 80,000 volunteers now on the ground. We're finding it.
I'm sorry. For some reason, I held on that and it sped up. Sorry about that. Here we go.
New states every week from now on. We're way ahead of our benchmarks. We will be on the ballot in 50 states and the District of Columbia. We have, I think we have 80,000 volunteers now on the ground. We're finding it extraordinarily easy, actually, to persuade people to sign. And
let's pause here. Did you guys hear what he just said? He said they're going to be announcing new states every week and that they're way ahead of their benchmark. Look, I said this before, and I'm going to say this again. Donald Trump has acknowledged RFK Jr.'s race. At some point, Trump mentioned, it would be great if he teamed up with me or something like that, something similar to that or whatever. And RFK said he was not interested. But till this day, Joe Biden is pretending like RFK Jr. is not in this race. He has not acknowledged that RFK Jr. is in this race. He has not even tried to criticize him in reference to campaigns, which technically candidates should be doing. Candidates should be criticizing each other's campaigns to prove that they are the best candidate and they have the best campaign. Joe Biden's strategy of pretending like RFK Jr. is not in this race and that he does not exist has been a bad idea. And I called that from day one. And I said before, RFK Jr. is not my candidate. That being said, just because he's not my candidate doesn't mean that he's not polling well as an independent candidate. I think the Biden administration must have assumed that once RFK Jr. was getting the difficulties in the Democratic Party and the DNC pulled their usual tricks, as they always tend to do, that he would just go away. But he didn't go away. He left the Democratic Party and launched his campaign as an independent. And then after that, I'm assuming they probably said, oh, God, this guy's not a threat at all. He's running as an independent. He's not even going to get on the ballot. Not thinking about the fact that he has the name recognition, the Kennedy name recognition. I don't think they really expected RFK Jr.'s campaign to get to this point. And wait till I show you the polls for Arizona. So why I said this before, I think it was a big mistake for Joe Biden to pretend like RFK Jr. is not in this race, because ignoring them doesn't necessarily make someone go away. I think that was a big mistake.
And we're ahead of all of our expectations.
What do you say to those who say you're just a spoiler? You were very critical of Ralph Nader back in 2000. You wrote a piece in the New York Times criticizing him and saying that he was going to hurt the environment by handing the election to George W. Bush. So what do you say now to those who say that you're in the same position?
I hope to be a spoiler for both President Trump and President Biden. I hope to take votes from each of them and win the election.
So you don't consider yourself a spoiler?
No, I'm not in here to do anything except to win.
President Biden was in an ice cream shop and he was asked about Gaza, and he said, while eating ice cream, oh, there's going to be a ceasefire by the weekend. No, not by the weekend, by right after the weekend. And it's not the first time that we've heard him take on serious foreign policy issues in that kind of light environment. We don't hear from him a lot in terms of laying out his thinking on some of these big foreign policy issues. What do you think about his candidacy at this point?
I think he needs to come out of the White House and show Americans that he has the cognitive capacity to, and the mental acuity to handle this job at probably the most challenging time now, at least in recent American history. We're facing issues that are existential. We're involved in 2 wars. We have AI coming down, which is going to change everything, and there's enormous dangers in it. we need we have an economic crisis in this country where, the middle class is disappearing. It's been torpedoed. Or 57% of Americans can't put their hands on $1,000, where an entire generation of kids cannot buy a home. This is a crisis. We need a president who is thinking about these things, who is articulating the solution for the American people.
Do you not have confidence that he can serve?
I think he needs to show Americans that he, a lot of these decisions are the products of complex and nuanced thought, and those thoughts need to be articulated to the American people in a way that we all support him. And I do not think that that's happening now. Our children's lives are dependent on that 3:00 a.m. call, and we need to know that we have a president who can wake up in the middle of the night and who is on his feet and thinking about those things. And
pause here for a second. So this is RFK Jr. talking about Joe Biden's mental acuity, right? Remember, it was just a couple of months ago where a lot of these candidates were questioned about, do you think that Joe Biden, is too old? They were trying to say too old instead of, do you think that he has the mental capacity to be president again? Remember, all these candidates were afraid to say that they didn't think that he should run for re-election. Notice that has shifted now. Notice more of them are more open and more upfront about saying, yeah, I don't think, I don't think he's got it. As we get closer and closer to November, I think people are going to hit back at Joe Biden even harder the closer we get to November. And this is why I said before, Joe Biden sitting here pretending like RFK Jr. is not running in this race and that he is not actually a threat to Joe Biden and actually to Donald Trump. That is a horrible decision. I don't know who's advising Joe Biden. I don't know who's telling him to make the decisions that he's making, but it is a horrible mistake. Now, I will say there was a third party / independent candidate debate that I did cover on Friday on this show. The debate happened on Thursday, and a lot of people were surprised that RFK and Cornel West were not a part of that debate. They were all invited, but for whatever reason, they were not there. I think that was also a mistake. If you get a chance, go watch that third party debate. It's on NTD YouTube channel. Go watch that, because that actually was a well moderated and an intelligent debate for once, where people aren't yelling and talking all over each other. But the fact that he didn't even participate in that debate and his polling numbers are continuing to increase, that is very telling.
I think a lot of Americans have lost confidence in that.
So you're saying you don't think he's actually in charge?
You know what? I have a personal issue, which is my Secret Service protection. And I've known President Biden for 40 years, and he was a friend. With all of the issues about him, he was somebody who, I thought at least, had a kind of fundamental decency. And the fact, I just don't believe that he would have personally made the decision to deny me for Secret Service protection. I think somebody else is making those decisions.
You've been supportive of Israel's battle.
Before we get into the Israel thing, because that's about to be a doozy, but notice what he just said there, that he doesn't think that, in a nice way, he doesn't think that Joe Biden is making these decisions. I don't think Joe Biden has been making these decisions. I still think that Barack Obama has been behind the scenes somewhere pulling these strings. And you can kind of tell, because Barack Obama will release a statement, and then the next thing you know, you'll see Joe Biden move in such a way or change the discussion in reference to a particular issue based on a statement that Barack Obama gave. This is how I've been feeling for quite some time. We really think Joe Biden's the one making these decisions here. Joe Biden don't even know where he's at half the time. Doesn't even know where he's at half the time. So I don't know. Now, we get into this conversation here with Israel and Gaza. This is where things go crazy.
In Gaza, What about now? Would you be encouraging Israel to stop the bombing in Gaza, or do you support, as Bibi Netanyahu has called for this week, that they have to finish the job and eliminate Hamas?
Well, I think Israel, like every other nation, has a right to defend itself. I think
Pause. You see how all the Zionists use that talking point. I think Israel has a right to defend itself. But you never hear them say that the Palestinian people have a right to defend theirself. That is a Zionist talking point. That is the same talking point that AIPAC uses. So RFK Jr., he may say that he's not a Zionist, but he's using Zionist talking points, whether he realizes it or not.
we have to come down to the fact that Hamas has said we don't want to negotiate. We want only one thing, which is the annihilation of Israel, the extermination of Jews in this part of the world. So I think, I'm not a fan of Bibi Netanyahu's. I don't think most Israelis are. I think he would be voted out, but I think most Israelis are overwhelmed. Israel is today unified because they feel embattled. They feel that this is an existential risk to them. I think it.
Pause. So he just told you that Hamas doesn't want to negotiate. That is an outright lie. It was just over a week or so that Hamas offered a ceasefire to release all the hostages. That was just over a week ago. That is a blatant lie. RFK Jr., I'm pretty sure, watches the news just like I do. I'm pretty sure he is well aware of that. So when it comes to Israel and Gaza, this guy is just blatantly lying. Now, here's the thing. The host here, the Fox News correspondent, she knows that too. She is the news. She knows as well that Hamas offered a ceasefire. She don't push back, though, because that's not what she's paid to do. She's not paid to show that Israel is in the wrong. She's paid to show that Israel is in the right. You have to know who owns Fox News. So Rupert Murdoch, someone like him who is also a Zionist. And that is the narrative that they are going to have. So for RFK Jr. to sit there and pretend like all Hamas wants is the annihilation of Jewish people, first of all, that is wrong. He's referring to a charter that was over decades old. Their charter has been renewed. They have explained this multiple times before, and other journalists have explained this multiple times before. But RFK Jr. is blatantly lying to you. And some people need to, you guys who are RFK Jr. supporters, you need to start asking why. You need to start asking, you go to these rallies to see RFK, you need to ask him, why are you telling blatant lies about Israel and Gaza? Ask him. I want to know what he says.
Say, it's a complex issue and it's not easy, but we have to look at how do you avoid civilian deaths over the long term, not just immediately.
There's some discussion that Joe Biden, the president, could lose the vote in Michigan based on a stance that's very similar to the one that you just presented, because he could lose 200,000 Muslim voters in Michigan. Michigan's a state that you think you just put on the list of when you might be able to win. Is that going to hurt you there?
I think, we need to make that distinction that Hamas is not the friend of the Palestinian people. Hamas is the abuser of the Palestinian people, and we need to point to Hamas.
Pause here. So I haven't seen RFK Jr. have any conversation with Palestinian people. I have. Those of us at RBN have spoken to the Palestinian Network. I've spoken to Palestinian activists here in my community. And that is not what they would tell you. That is not what they would tell you about Hamas, by the way. And they may not always agree with all of the tactics that Hamas does, but they wouldn't tell you what RFK just told you, that they're the enemy of the people. And how would RFK know? And he's not having these conversations with Palestinian people. He said he's been to the West Bank. He said he's been to Israel, but he has not been to Gaza. And Gaza is a totally different concept than the West Bank and Israel. The West Bank, yes, they do have apartheid. Yes, there are certain things that are happening in the West Bank where Palestinians are being pulled out of their homes. They have separate roads that, based on your passport, determines what road that you can walk on and whether or not you can actually drive or take public transportation based on this passport that you have. That is apartheid, which he continues to deny. But this is why he wouldn't have that conversation with Max Blumenthal. This is why you haven't seen RFK Jr. on any left independent media show. I wouldn't expect him to come on this show because I've been really mean. I've been really mean. But not only that, I'm not one of the bigger shows. But the fact that you don't see him on a show like Katie Halper's show or Useful Idiots with Katie and Aaron or the Grayzone or Bad Faith or even TYT, the fact that you don't see him come onto any of those shows on the left, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? Out of all of them, you'd at least pick TYT because they would go the softest on them, and they're more corporate, like that kind of thing. But don't you guys think that's really strange? Because he doesn't want to talk to people that know what they're talking about when it comes to this particular issue.
When we see civilian deaths happening, which are horrific and unacceptable, we need to understand that, that Hamas is at fault.
Let me ask you this. With regard to the border, there is a battle on Capitol Hill right now that many conservatives believe that you should secure the border before you send another dollar to help Ukraine. Do you agree with that?
I think the Ukraine war should be ended. And I think I wouldn't necessarily couple those issues, but I think the Ukraine war is a war of choice.
See, this is another example of the people that basically support ending the Ukraine war. But when it comes to Israel and Gaza, they don't support ending that. Because I pointed this out before that some of these people that said they want the Ukraine war to end, they don't want these wars. Once that country changed to Israel, you notice they were all for it. RFK Jr. was on Twitter telling people, let's give Israel the weapons that they need to go in there and defeat, Hamas and da-da-da. And all of a sudden people were like, I thought he said he was the peace candidate. So I tried to warn you guys about some of these people that were against that war in Ukraine, but are totally fine for this war in Gaza. And that tells me again that some of these people either are in bed with the Israeli lobby, or I would not be surprised if the Israeli lobby has some dirt on them, has some type of blackmail against them. Wouldn't be surprised if that's the case with RFK Jr. They may have something on him. Would not be surprised. Because you can't tell me, even if you were extremely ignorant and did not understand what has happened to the Palestinian people all these years, the fact that you refuse to have the conversation with people who have been to Gaza and are very knowledgeable about that issue, that tells me everything I need to know. Especially when you said publicly that you would have the conversation with Max Blumenthal. And it doesn't even have to be Max, but it should be someone who knows about the Palestinian perspective and what has happened to the Palestinian people, and not your Zionist friends that are trying to make money by standing next to you. Hello. So I know what it is. I know what's really going on. We'll get back to the border issue here.
It's a war that's easily settled, and that we should not be spending any more money in Ukraine. We need that money here.
Do you believe that any person who has crossed the border and commits a crime should be deported from this country?
Of course. Of course they should be deported. And the major thing is to shut down the border, which we can do pretty much overnight. And that, through a combination of policy of reinstating the Migrant Protection Act, which requires people who coming through with asylum claims that their case be adjudicated in Mexico, not the United States. We should end the catch and release program and have a catch and return program at the border.
And build a wall?
We need the wall. We need a physical barrier, yes, a wall in the urban areas and places where migrants can disappear very quickly. And then we need other infrastructure, including monitoring, long-range cameras, lights, fences, and a lot of the other areas. You don't need to put a wall 2,200 miles from Brownsville, Texas to San Diego, but you need monitoring systems. And we had those in place, and the Biden administration dismantled them.
Now, how are you going to talk about immigration and the border and you not get back to foreign policy? These are just certain things I pay attention to. You always have to get back to the why. The why are they coming here? They're coming here because of what we've done to them in their countries. We've come here. People say, oh, there's so many people coming from Venezuela. Didn't the U.S. government implement a coup in Venezuela? Didn't Anya from the Grayzone write an entire book about that coup? So think about this, people. Look at the places where they're coming from and then do the research and see what the U.S. government did in those countries within the past 5 years. That's all you got to do. So putting up walls and all this kind of stuff, okay, you're not getting to the root cause of the problem. Increasing the wall, putting up a wall, that's not going to stop people from coming. People are still going to show up. Until you fix what you have done to these people's countries, until the U.S. government takes their hands out of these countries, until they release the sanctions that they put on these countries, we will continue to have this problem. And I would expect someone like RFK Jr., who's a lawyer, to be very well aware of that.
So a lot more there. And you can hear the entire discussion with the panel in East Palestine and also my one-on-one with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the Untold Story podcast. That's going to be available. Both of those will be available. A double podcast.
Okay. Now, I want to show you what else is happening here, because there's a little bit more. Now, I told you he has enough signatures now to get ballot access in Arizona. It looks like he's going to get, that is going to happen. It has not been confirmed, but they got the signatures. So it looks like that is going to happen. Now check this out. Choice for president among registered voters in Arizona. 33% say Joe Biden, 33% say Donald Trump, 26% says RFK, and he's an independent. Everybody take a minute and look at this. What does that tell you, folks? I wouldn't be surprised if the Georgia poll shows something similar when that is released, right? This is why I said it was a big mistake for Joe Biden's campaign to pretend like RFK Jr. is not running against him. And I will also say this to the other candidates that are running as well. You guys need to be going after RFK. Like, it's just, I know you're running against Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I totally get that. But you guys should be going hard after RFK as well. And I'd say this to anybody. All of you guys running, Jasmine Sherman, Jill Stein, Cornell, all of you guys that are running third party independent, Claudia De La Cruz, you guys need to be going after RFK. Because his numbers, the fact that he's at 26% in Arizona, he is your competition. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, RFK Jr. is a competitor to you. He is a competitor. I don't understand why more people aren't going after this dude. Because if it were me and I were running, I wouldn't just be calling out Joe Biden. I wouldn't just call out Donald Trump. I would be calling out RFK heavily if I was running for president, especially around Israel and Gaza. So what is up, folks? Are you guys noticing this? Why aren't more people, why aren't the rest of these people heavily coming after RFK as well? I saw these polls. I know they saw these polls. I don't know. But if it were me, I would not sleep on that. I would not sleep on those numbers. That's Arizona. We'll have to wait for the Georgia one, because I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia is also similar. I'm telling you right now. Joe Biden should be embarrassed that he's even tied with Donald Trump in Arizona. You are running on the soul of this country. How you get tied with him? You see the what? You see the what? What's wrong, Tom? Tom Jones is back, says something smells. You don't believe the polls, Tom? Remember, Arizona had a lot of independent voters in 2020. So remember that. But I hope that is a wake-up call for Trump and Biden and everybody else that's running. I don't understand. If it were me, I would be heavily going after him as well. And that brings up another question about independence. Here's a clip here from MSNBC. It shows you just how these independent candidates have started to rise over the years. This is wild. And here's Morning Joe. They can't believe this either.
Is a rising tide of independent voters sweeping the nation. A recent poll shows 45% of Americans now identify as unaffiliated with any political party. A big move away from traditional allegiances that is reshaping the political landscape. And joining us now with charts on this is former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst, Steve Ratner.
Steve, thanks so much for being with us. You know, a lot of people look at this time and in the future, and they're thinking that maybe the rise and possibly fall of Donald Trump, or the rise, fall, and rise of Donald Trump is going to be the story, really the political story for the next 10, 20 years, the impact on the country. I've got to say, politically, the rise of independence, which you're looking at right now, I think will be far more significant, because it does seem that we're about to break what John Meacham has called that 150-year duopoly that has controlled American politics.
Yeah, Joe, and actually the two things I think are connected, but we'll see what everybody else thinks when I show you some numbers here. So in terms of Mika's lead-in and this whole rise of independence, let me just show to you what it looks like on a chart. If you go back to 2004, roughly an even division among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And it has simply gone like this, like Jaws. Republicans and Democrats have ended up in the same place, although Democrats did better for a while. But now, as Mika said, independents are up to 45%. And what is this?
Let's pause here. So look at this graph. Independents up to 45%. The Democrats and Republicans continue to decrease in this country. This is registered voters. I'm a registered independent. I was registered Democrat when I voted for Bernie in 2020. And then after that, I said, bruh, I'm out of the two-party system. And I changed my registration to independent. Now, here's the thing, folks. If 45% of independent voters are registered as independents, imagine if all of those people registered as independents actually voted for an independent or third-party candidate instead of just deciding to go with one of the sides of the duopoly. Because part of the problem that you run into is that a lot of these people that are registered independents, at the end of the day, they're like, oh, this time I might vote Republican, next time I might vote Democrat. But I'm like an independent, okay? Meaning I'm not voting for either one. So when people say, what could we do for third parties to really get some type of energy and oomph and the third party movement in this country, what we really should be doing is going after the registered independent voters and convincing them to vote for the independent or the third party candidates. Because to me, it just don't make no sense. If you're going to go ahead and vote for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, you might as well stay registered as one of them. That's 45%, folks. 45%. Yes. Thank you for saying that, Scene Kid. Just check your state laws to see if registering as independent stops your voice from being heard in the primary process. But for me, as a registered independent, I'm not trying to vote in the primary process because I'm not trying to vote for either one of these clowns. Like, that's the thing. But I get what you're saying. You see what I mean? 45%. Think about the type of power that we could actually have in reference to a third party movement in this country if all these people registered as independents actually voted for the independent or the third party candidate.
I think it reflects to a considerable degree people's unhappiness with the way our democracy operates. Only 27% of Americans believe that our system is working either well or very well. The rest think it's not working very well. There are 32 states that permit party registration. A lot actually don't. Those of us who live in those states don't really understand that, but that's the way it is. Disproportionately large number of independents in states that don't permit party registration. And all of these green states, there was an increase in independents over this period of time from 2014 to 2024. A few states where it went down, but basically independents on the rise.
Notice he said the green states here have an increase in independence, registered independence, right? I'm trying to get this back so we can pause it, right? Okay, look at the states. Check this out, folks. Some of these states that are always solid blue, we're talking about California, we're talking about Oregon, Hawaii. Florida's always a crazy one. I think that's North Carolina he's pointing to, North Carolina. We even have my state, Massachusetts, New York, okay, Pennsylvania. What you're seeing is some of these states that are traditionally, blue dog Democrat states have seen an increase in registered independent and third party voters. What that tells you is that people in these states can be moved, that they are movable. Now, if we can just get those people who change their registration to vote outside of the duopoly. And we could really change the game, I think. We really could. But I do want to wrap up this segment with something else that RFK announced. I couldn't believe this when I first saw this, but it's actually real. And RFK Jr. actually hosted a Twitter space. RFK Jr. released a rap song called Standing on Business, which is supposed to be business. And then he has Angela Stanton's a part of this. Remember, she was a Trump supporter. And you got Lil Boozy, like Drummer Boy, Boozy, Jasfa, Turk, Angela Stanton, and RFK Jr. They made a song called Standing on Business. On business. Guys. And I listened to it. It's just the pandering of it all. And then second of all, the black people that are part of this, first of all, I never would have been caught dead in this. You would have never got me to be a part of this, ever. Okay? Why is it like when they talking to us, like they got to rap, got to dance? Remember the guy that ran for office, Democrat primary 2020, Tom? I forget his last name. Remember the guy, Tom? Like he was really rich. I think he might have been a billionaire at one point or whatever, but he actually did really well polling wise in South Carolina. That guy was dancing at the South Carolina primary. They had him on video. He was on stage dancing and trying to sing to back that ass up. You ain't got to do all that. Actually, we prefer if you don't. Like, just because you come in to talk to black people. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Tom Steyer. He was dancing on stage to back that ass up. We don't need all that. Like, you ain't got to rap. You don't have to get on stage and start break dancing or dancing. You ain't got to do all of that. Okay? This is a hot mess. And he was happy about it. It's like RFK Jr. unites with hip hop icons for a campaign anthem, Standing on Business. And he actually said, I can't play it on here because of the copyright. But he actually said in the song, the comments are awful. Oh my God. In the song, he actually said, I'll bring it up. He actually you see him putting on the headphones and he goes, I'm about my business. No. I can't. I'll show you in just a second. Can we go to my Twitter, Eric? Oh, wait, I guess I could do that myself. I just saw the search button here. Okay, look, I'll show it to you. Watch. I can't play it though, because like I said, they probably have copyright. Oh, hey, there's me. It should be right about. Yes. I was like, oh no. I said, these candidates love to pander to black people. This fool just said business. Everyone speaks our language when they're trying to get our votes. This is a hot mess. And it's like I said, let me make sure I can't play, but this is him here. And he shared it too, all loud and happy about it. Believe it or not, on my last trip to Atlanta, I hit the studio and we're officially releasing our new song, Standing on Business. He did it. Is the Twitter space still there? Did they save it? Yes, he even did a Twitter space. RFK Jr. drops first single with Boozy and Drummer Boy, Standing on Business. I can't. I'm gonna go to some of the comments. Eric, we can pull up part 2 for the VNC and we'll get to the Grayzone story. I can't. I don't know where this stuff comes from. Like, whose idea was this? Thank you for the super chat, Les. Sabby, nice to have your company here in Bonnie, Scotland. What's up? There's been quite a few people actually popping in from Scotland recently. I noticed that. What's going on, Roger? Georgia only went blue because of the $2,000 promised but reneged. Oh, yeah, the $2,000 checks. That's a good point, too. Thank you for the super chat, B. TikTok indie news reporter Link Lauren is now working with RFK. Remember, he kind of debated broken points? Oh, yeah, that's right. Might help Kennedy with Zoomers. I don't know, dude. I don't know. I just feel like this is just people all over the place. Thank you for the super chat, Stefan. RFK's PAC money is APAC money. We're not going to say that here. We're going to say the Zionists are shooting at their own goal because RFK talked their talk to get on ballots and eventually win. And then finally, as POTUS, help the Palestinians. Only that would make sense. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be trying to help the Palestinians. He's over here talking about business. Thank you for the super chat, Frank. Those walls are to keep us in. Interesting, Frank. And thank you, Trash Panda. Morning joke. Thank you for that. Trust me, bro, says sounds like Sabby is rooting for JB. No, I'm assuming you mean Joe Biden. No, you must be new. You must be new. I'll get the comments on Rockfin, Eric. On business. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Lois. Sabby, ABC News just said Kamala Harris just called for a ceasefire in Gaza, ice cream cone style, while commemorating about Bloody Sunday. Yeah, I saw a short clip, like a 20-second clip of that, but not the full thing yet. So I'll probably discuss that on Tuesday. And thank you for this tip, Roger. The Clintons and Obama control the media, so they gave the okay to talk about Joe's cognitive decline. Also, they can't say, well, Trump is a racist, so why would you vote for him when we all, I don't know what you mean there, it doesn't matter what you ID as, what matters is what you're registered as. Arizona, a third registered indie, a third registered, I think you mean Dem, and a third registered GOP. Jasmine hit RFK on reparations. Jill against single payer, Claudia Gaza, Chase/Lars pro-war. And thank you for the Rumble rants. Unfuck the world. I like that. Many voters would vote for RFK if he reversed his policy on genocide. Of course, voters would still have to ignore RFK's donors and his Zionist wife. Ouch. I like his stance on the border, though. Wow. Shots called out. Okay. We're coming up on this final story here about the Grayzone. So interesting things have happened. If you remember, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, the Grayzone was actually, they were the first ones, theirself, Monda Weiss and Electric Intifada. They were the ones that actually debunked the New York Times sexual assault story, right? They were the first ones to debunk that. And there was pushback and criticism. Max Blumenthal went on to Rising and debated against Robbie about that. But they were the first. They were the first. Okay. I say that because recently The Intercept also has pointed out information about that same story. We covered this a couple of days ago, that one of the journalists, Anat Shorts, actually was a former member of the IDF. You can't make this stuff up. Former member of the IDF. And also it was discovered by Z Squirrel that she had liked genocidal tweets on Twitter, that she was definitely a Zionist, obviously. And apparently she wasn't a journalist at all. All of a sudden she became a freelance journalist right after October 7th. So there was a lot revealed there, and we covered that story. However, what I said when I talked about that information that was revealed by The Intercept is that it was very weird to me that they did not credit the Grayzone or Mondaweiss or Electric Intifada for being the first to debunk that story. And I also noticed that when the Grayzone, when The Intercept revealed the information that they revealed about that story, there was no pushback in reference to the left, quote unquote, media space. It was just accepted as fact. But when the Grayzone first debunked that story, there was pushback, right? Well, the Grayzone has finally spoken out about that. And we're going to get into that from Max and Aaron. They have quite a bit to say here about how these events transpired and also how they feel about the fact that people like Ryan Grimm, we're just going to say the name here, Ryan Grimm, and other members of The Intercept and other members of the left independent media space decided to just pretend like the Grayzone did not debunk this story first, and also decided to just give all the credit to The Intercept, knowing that The Intercept, they even read some of the work of the Grayzone on the interview with Democracy Now! Let's go ahead and get into this clip here from Aaron and Max.
If you've watched the Grayzone, if you followed us, you've seen that from the start, we've been calling out this scam that there was sexual violence committed by Hamas militants on October 7th. This has been going on for a long time. These allegations were rolled out precisely at a time when Israel was under, global scrutiny for its atrocities in Gaza. And this has been deliberately used to try to deflect from that, to deflect for the horrors going on in front of our eyes. And now, though, the Times, the New York Times, which put out a story in late December, which we debunked at the Grayzone, is walking back some of its core claims. And this comes via The Intercept. The Intercept did a story about this, picking up on the reporting we did, which we're going to talk more about in a second, because they've done so, I think, in a really disingenuous way by not crediting the people who debunked the story that they're now following up on. But they did
pause here for a second. How would you guys feel is when I did this show, I didn't give credit to the sources? Like, how would you feel if I just pretended like I wrote these articles? How would you feel, right? So that's not ethical journalism. And I don't think this has anything to do with the information that the Grayzone reported. I think it has to do with gatekeeping and personality differences, which I will get into in just a bit. But that's really what this is about.
Elicit some important admissions from the New York Times. And one of them is that the Times is now walking back its initial claim. So this is what the Times tells The Intercept now. They say that on October 7th, quote, there may have been systematic use of sexual assault. That's what a New York Times reporter told The Intercept. But that's not what the New York Times said in its story, which is still up. It says that they've uncovered, quote, a pattern of rape, mutilation, and extreme brutality against women in the attacks on Israel. So there's no qualifier there. They may have used a pattern of rape and sexual violence. They're declaring that Hamas did. But now, because they become under so much scrutiny, including from the Grayzone, they're walking that back. And, the impetus for this retraction, this tacit retraction by the Times, was that one of their contributors to this story, an Israeli woman named Anat Schwartz, has come under scrutiny because she was caught liking genocidal anti-Palestinian posts on Twitter. She was caught by the Twitter account Zay Squirrel, which then The Intercept followed up on.
Yep.
So
follow that account, you guys, on Twitter. Zay Squirrel, ZEI Squirrel.
We'll sort of start from the beginning here. We came out right out of the gate when this story came out, exposing demonstrably false testimonies by supposed witnesses, inconsistencies in those testimonies, impossibilities and discrepancies between actual evidence and what was claimed in that article. What we found was a really unprofessional rehearsal of an attempt to produce atrocity propaganda on behalf of Israel to justify its ongoing genocide in Gaza, which is infuriating. And I said from the beginning that this was one of the worst cases of journalistic malpractice on its face that I've seen since Judith Miller and her WMD lies that were published in the New York Times, fed to her by Bush administration neocons. And I also said that before we were done with him, Jeffrey Gettleman, the lead author of this article, would have to answer for what he did. So Jeffrey Gettleman was sort of compelled to issue a follow-up piece, which was obviously a response to us, as well as the Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss, who were also leading the way on debunking this article.
Let me go ahead and pause it there. And we're going to go to the next part there, because most of you guys already know about this part of the story. I want to get to this piece here about them not receiving credit, because I really do have a problem with that. Like, that really bothers me for people to sit up here and pretend like they don't know where that information came from when they know damn well where that information came from.
We don't know how this is going to end up, and it's important to keep the pressure on. And, you know, I give The Intercept credit for keeping the pressure on.
Yeah, they've done something important. Yeah, no, their reporting here was important. They picked up on something that we missed, which is after Z Squirrel, which they're really picking up on, exposes Anat Schwartz's role. They found a podcast of hers in which she made some really damning admissions, and they reported on that. And they also got the story from inside the New York Times that there are people uncomfortable with Gettleman's story, and that the Daily, the podcast, couldn't do an episode about it. That's important. But I guess what we're not going to get into, what's unacceptable, in my opinion, is they're going out of their way to refuse to acknowledge the people who first debunked this story and who created the controversy around the story, which they're now picking up on.
Yep.
Let me pause before Max comes back in. Let me tell you a little story, okay? So when I talk about gatekeeping, like, there's gatekeeping, like, in every space. I feel like, whether it's academia, whether it's, you know, the corporate world, whether it's work, you probably got gatekeeping at your job. So what I have noticed in independent media is that there are gatekeepers here too. So it's like, for whatever reason, actually, I will get into the reasons. I know the reasons. It has been decided by some, the gatekeepers, that there are certain people in this space, even those that are investigative journalists, that they are not going to credit, or they are not going to acknowledge, or if they do acknowledge them, it's only going to be in the form of a smear. That is what the gatekeepers have decided. And we've seen these gatekeepers, the Majority Reports, the TYT, you know, they're gatekeepers. So basically the way it works is that if the gatekeepers do not give you the shout out for your work, oftentimes you will go unnoticed. The difference here, I think, with the Grayzone is that they are big within their self, right? So that they don't really need to have the shout out from TYT or Majority Report. Like, they are pretty well known when it comes to investigative journalism and when it comes to even independent media, right? So people know them because they put into a lot of work. That being said, if those gatekeepers pretend like the work that you have done does not exist, or they don't acknowledge that you're the one who did the work, in turn, what can happen is that the gatekeeper ends up getting the credit for reading the work. And you'll see this with Ryan Grimm, reading some of the things that you actually did, and the gatekeeper will get all the credit for it. And Ryan Grimm is one of those gatekeepers too. And Ryan Grimm has been on this show. So it is what it is. You can't come to me and say, I wasn't willing to talk to someone that I disagree with. Ryan Grimm has been on this show. And he's one of those gatekeepers. And The Intercept has changed a lot since, and Glenn Greenwald has explained this multiple times since he left The Intercept. So it is, I would consider that to be unethical journalism when you don't give the credit where it's due. And that's how I was taught when I studied broadcast journalism. I was taught that you're supposed to give the credit. And I just feel like it's unethical when you don't do that. But another damn thing, I got some things to say about Democracy Now! Too. Because Democracy Now!, they're the ones that did the interview with Ryan Grimm and with Jeremy from The Intercept. And Democracy Now!, they sit here and they just act like, oh, we'll get to that in a second. Let me finish this.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the Ryan Grimm and Daniel Boguslaw article, which was an important piece citing sourcing inside the New York Times on the New York Times decision to shelve its daily podcast based on Gettleman and Company's Hamas mass rape hoax article. Why did that happen? Why did it decide to shelve the podcast? Because we exposed that article, not The Intercept. We did it. Electronic Intifada did it. Yeah. Mondo Weiss did it. Mondo Weiss doesn't get enough credit because a lot of their reporting was anonymous, or their debunking was done anonymously, but they did an important job. They've been doing an important job. All these this publications and other Twitter users have been doing an important job, not only with this story, but with Zaka, the fake aid, the fake rescue organization, with all the atrocity fabrications, the Hannibal directive use on October 7th. We've been out there from the beginning. So how can The Intercept tell the story of why this article fell apart and why the New York Times decided to shelve that podcast without mentioning us? It's itself journalistic malpractice. You're not telling your readers why it happened.
Yeah, they're actually repeating what Jeffrey Gettleman did, because after we exposed Jeffrey Gettleman's fraud, along with Mondo Weiss and Electronic Intifada, as we talked about earlier, Gettleman wrote that follow-up piece where he had to address his unspecified critics. He says the word critics multiple times. Critics say this. He doesn't cite us and doesn't acknowledge us, but he's responding to the points we raised. So basically, The Intercept did the exact same thing, which is basically erase the fact that we debunked the story that created this controversy. And so it's weird there, even like they're actually emulating his behavior. And why we can speculate, why do even independent journalists have such contempt for other independent journalists? I mean, the most charitable version is like, I personally have been very critical of The Intercept. I make fun of them because they bought into all these scams that we've debunked: Russiagate, Syria dirty war, the Hunter Biden laptop being Russian disinformation.
Pause. So did you hear the stories that Aaron just mentioned? That's important. The Syria war, Russiagate. I didn't think they would have fallen for that one, but apparently that one as well, right? So they don't like it. Like, the gatekeepers don't like it when you prove them wrong. Especially, they just kind of look at you like, oh, who are you supposed to be? Like, we're The Intercept, that kind of thing. The Hunter Biden laptop story, you have to remember, Glenn Greenwald wanted to publish that story through The Intercept. They wouldn't allow Glenn Greenwald to publish the Hunter Biden laptop story. That's why Glenn Greenwald left The Intercept, because they wouldn't let him publish that story. So look, the thing is, gatekeepers, that's what this is really about, is gatekeeping. They control the narrative. So this doesn't just happen in mainstream media, you guys. As you can see, this happens in independent media as well. And as long as the gatekeepers continue to gatekeep, it makes it more difficult for people to hear the truth here and where it actually came from.
The Ukraine proxy war, they were pretty weak on. I mean, we can go on and on. And so it's not nice to probably have to acknowledge people who criticize you and make fun of you, but there's also such thing as minimal journalistic courtesy. And for all my criticisms of The Intercept, I've never not acknowledged when they've done really important reporting. For example, Ryan Grimm helping to expose the U.S. role in the coup in Pakistan and overthrowing Imran Khan. It's really important, and I'll always credit that. But they refuse consistently to offer the same courtesy. And in this case, it's just so egregious, and we have more examples of it.
let me pause here for a second. So same thing. I've given Ryan Grimm credit in reference to like his reporting about Imran Khan. You guys have seen me. I've covered that story a couple times on the show. I will read an article from The Intercept, and if it's by Ryan Grimm, I will tell you it's by Ryan Grimm. Like just because he's not my favorite person. And I do still consider him to be a gatekeeper. Just because he's not my favorite person, that doesn't mean I'm not going to pretend like that's his work. That doesn't mean like I'm not going to give credit where credit is due. For him, however, on the other hand, it does mean that. You see what I mean? So this is what happens with the gatekeepers. They're not willing to give credit where credit is due simply because they don't like you, and they don't like you because you proved them wrong on their own reporting. Isn't that really messed up? Ain't that some shit? So when you see this interview with Democracy Now, okay, when they actually announced the story, here's Democracy Now, they announced it on Twitter. A major New York Times investigation into the violence of October 7th has come under intense criticism both inside and outside the newspaper. And you see, they interviewed Ryan and they interviewed Jeremy, right? Again, Democracy Now. So when you go to the interview, we'll go to the part with Ryan. This is who they chose to interview about this story. Now, here's the problem, folks. Do you think Democracy Now doesn't know who the Grayzone are? Aaron Mate used to work for Democracy Now. Aaron Mate used to sit right on that screen, just like Amy Goodman. He used to work there. So it's not that Amy Goodman doesn't know who Aaron is. It's not that Amy Goodman doesn't know who Max Blumenthal is. So what's going on there? Gatekeeping. More gatekeeping. You know why? Because Democracy Now is often funded by Democrat donors under the guise of pretending to be independent, right?
And oftentimes as journalists, we have something that we think we're going to be able to prove. We report it out and then we can't quite get it. Like we just don't land the story. But what the Times did is they wrote the story anyway. But that gets you then to the daily episode. So this article comes out at the very end of December, as the New York Times always does. Its landmark pieces get turned into episodes of their flagship podcast, The Daily. But immediately after the story came out, it started coming under criticism because, as Jeremy pointed out, a lot of the named subjects of the story have enormous credibility problems. And so this starts getting pointed out inside the
pause. Okay, this part here about the a lot of the victims or the witnesses that came forward have credibility problems. Where was that first reported? That was first reported with the Grayzone. They were the ones to tell you that the witnesses were not credible, that they found like these little holes like in their stories. So again, Ryan Grimm, why don't you mention that? Why don't you say that the Grayzone had actually reported that the witnesses were not found to be credited? Because he don't want to shout them out on Democracy Now.
Times, the producers of The Daily have their own kind of fact-checking process where they go over the stories. And the original script that was produced for that first episode had to be discarded because the producers there couldn't stand behind it. So they redrafted a second script, which had a lot of caveats and was closer to the first version that I laid out just now. Which is an interesting podcast episode and is something worth exploring. But if they had aired that, it would have raised questions about why they were walking away from the certainty of the original piece. So we reported.
So this is the part that's also important, that, that podcast episode that Max was referring to. So again, it's kind of helpful here to mention, why that episode did not air, because of the reporting from the Grayzone, because what they found out from those witnesses, and they were saying that it was a lie about the October 7 sexual assaults. So again, that's important for people to know. But Ryan, of course, leaves that out.
On the kind of machinations inside the New York Times about this, the controversy, the disputes that were going on. And since then, as Vanity Fair reported, the New York Times has, rather than reviewing the kind of journalism that went into this, they are launching a leak investigation to try to figure out who's talking to us.
And he did the same thing, right? He did the same thing in reference to rather reviewing the journalism that went into debunking the story. So he did the same thing that he accused the New York Times of doing. So you see these gatekeepers. So check this out.
In February, one of the reporters behind the New York Times investigation, the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Jeffrey Gettleman, spoke at a conference on conflict-related sexual violence hosted by Columbia University. He talked about the piece.
I did some stories about hostages, and pretty soon, I mean, maybe, I don't know, within the first few days of this attack, we were hearing reports of rape and mutilations of women. We heard it right away. And maybe people in this room remember those videos of the female soldiers being taken away and the body of that one woman, Shani Locke, in the back of a pickup truck.
So what's interesting is, so she goes to this guy, Jeffrey Gettleman, right? This guy all the way over at Columbia University who was wrong, right? Who was incorrect. But you don't mention the people who were correct. You just, when it comes to mentioning the people who were correct, you mention the Intercept because they are the approved investigative journalists of the so-called left. They're approved by other people who do the gatekeeping as well. They're approved. They get the thumb of approval from Democracy Now! They get the stamp of approval from Majority Report. They get the stamp of approval from the Jacobin DSA types. So it's okay to bring them on in reference to what they found about those stories. But you don't bring on the outlet that actually were the first ones to debunk the story in the first place, mainly because you don't feel that they're reporting in reference to Syria and in reference to Russiagate. You don't feel that it supported your narrative at that point in time, and they proved you wrong. Amy Goodman, I gotta tell you, like I said, Amy Goodman, she come from a lot of privilege. She's another one. Family of Harvards. I tell you, she comes from a lot of privilege. And it's just really astounding to me that the Intercept says it and everybody cheers it on and says, let's get this story out there, go on to every show. But when the Grayzone actually debunked this first, you didn't see those same people cheering them on. In fact, even someone like Emma Vigilant, she's a part of that same gatekeeping bullshit, forgot to say during our coverage, Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill and DR Bogus Law's awesome reporting on the New York Times outrageous conduct regarding the mass, we'll say assault here, propaganda piece. Credit to Z Squirrel for their part in digging this up. One of the few great accounts left here. So you see these gatekeepers? Emma Vigilant, the Majority Reports, all these people. See how she can shout out the Intercept? Because again, Ryan Grimm is the DC bureau chief of the Intercept. He has access to the squad. He wrote a book about the squad and published it recently. So they buddy up with someone like him because he has access to those politicians. Now, Aaron actually came out and said, or came forward, I shouldn't say, I'm sorry, I got to watch my words on here. Aaron came forward and said, if you want to understand why Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill don't want to credit the journalists who first debunked the New York Times story, here's one reason: not confident to let facts speak for themselves. They're still going out of their way to pay lip service to the narrative. Here, Ryan declares that the idea that there would be no assault on October 7th is not taken seriously by pretty much anybody who understands kind of war and violence. First of all, October 7th wasn't a war. This was a one-day guerrilla operation in a very limited time frame. To frame it in the context of a war is in fact not serious. Second, that's not how you approach allegations. An allegation needs to be backed by credible evidence. In the absence of any credible evidence, there's no need to pay lip service to the allegation unless you're pandering. So he was referring to what Ryan said here, and I can play this for you really quick as well.
Two ways to think about what happened on October 7th. The first way is that it was a day of extraordinary mayhem and violence. The Israeli defenses melted away. Not only did you have several thousand Hamas fighters stream across the fence, but you also had hundreds of civilians, some associated with gangs, come across. And in that context, the idea that there would be no sexual assault is not taken seriously by pretty much anybody who understands kind of war and violence. That's one way to think about October. Two ways to.
So to Aaron's point there, first of all, there is a such thing called investigation and collecting evidence. And that was one of the things that Max pointed out on Rising, was that there was no forensic evidence. So how can you prove that actually took place? And two, it wasn't a war at that point in time. But yeah, as like a journalist, like there needs to be an investigation. You can't just say, well, of course this happened because that's what happens in war. You still have to do an investigation. Caitlin Johnstone is a real one. And she came forward and said a whole media industry is sprouting up around mainstream journalists, just reading the Grayzone and presenting its findings as their own original reporting because the Grayzone is considered naughty enough to steal from. And I couldn't have said it better myself. She's 100% correct there. And if you guys are on Twitter, you can see this all over Twitter. You can see it all over Twitter, how people are just, everybody's giving The Intercept and Ryan Grimm their kudos, pretending like nothing happened prior to. Here's another one here from Aaron Mate. He is actually correcting this woman here, where she said Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate of the Grayzone slam left-wing outlets Democracy Now! And The Intercept because they've reported China's mistreatment of Uyghurs and Assad's chemical attacks in Syria. Blumenthal and Mate dismissed these facts as Western imperialist propaganda. We'll get into that in just a second. But first and foremost, in reference to, just pay attention to what she said, mistreatment of the Uyghurs and Assad chemical attacks in Syria. So you have to remember, again, Aaron Mate actually won an award, right, for covering his coverage in Syria. Like, they just don't give people awards for making shit up. I'm sorry. It's just, so he responds to this and said, correction. If you watch the actual clip, we don't challenge the claim of China's mistreatment of Uyghurs. We challenge the claim of the Uyghur genocide. There's a clear difference between mistreatment and genocide. The latter is indeed imperial propaganda, which is why you can't even quote us properly. An actual genocide is what's happening in Gaza right now. And yes, we scrutinize allegations of Syrian government chemical attacks by reporting on the available facts, including the OPCW leaks. By contrast, just like the Uyghur genocide, our independent and establishment media colleagues parrot Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and Anthony Blinken. So I interviewed Aaron yes, I interviewed him right when I think he was reporting on the Uyghur genocide. And I did ask him about that. And one of the things that he said was, if there was a genocide happening, don't you think you would hear about it somewhere? And he said, what does the State Department say? And so I actually covered that on the show, where I looked up what the State Department said in reference to the Uyghurs. And they said they had no evidence to prove that there was a genocide of the Uyghur people. So to his point, mistreatment and genocide are two different things. Obviously, like the genocide in Gaza, it's everywhere. The genocide in the Congo has also been reported. So notice how she conflates the two, mistreatment and genocide. And then two, I don't know how many times I got to bring up the Syria thing on the show, because what's really weird to me is that people who get the Palestine, like they get that issue right, they still don't get the Syria issue right. When they won awards on this, they've debunked this multiple times. Like, I don't know what else needs to be done, right? But the gatekeepers, it's kind of like this unknown code that for the gatekeepers, you don't shout out the Intercept, or excuse me, you don't shout out the Grayzone unless you're trying to smear them. I kid you not, man. I kid you not. These people won awards. In fact, did you guys see this? So Max Blumenthal won an award just recently. I can't make this up. I can't make this up. It says right here. So this is the Pierre Spray Award. He just won this. Top prize, Max Blumenthal. It says right here, almost all of the reports on the current U.S.-backed Israeli war on Gaza came to us heavily laced with misinformation and lies, excuse me. That is why the work of Max Blumenthal, who has the benefit of in-depth reporting on Israel and Gaza in previous wars in the Grayzone, has not only been invaluable, but also indispensable. Most importantly, in rigorously sourced reports such as October 7 testimonies reveal Israel's military shelling Israeli citizens, as well as Israeli October 7 poster child was killed by Israeli tank, eyewitnesses reveal. He has brought to light truths otherwise assiduously ignored in mainstream media. His work has been significant enough to elicit a tribute in the form of a shyly crafted smear job in the Washington Post. We're proud to acknowledge the importance of Blumenthal's work with the Pierre Spray Journalists Award. You know, I don't know. I mean, I don't see these organizations just giving out awards to people for lying. You know, Aaron Mate also got the same award. In 2020, top prize Aaron Mate. We are awarding the top 2022 Pierre Spray Journalism Prize to Aaron Mate for his work published on Real Clear Investigations, the Aaron Mate Substack, and his pushback videos on the Grayzone site. Throughout the year, Mate reports on Washington's true objectives in the Ukraine war, such as urging regime change in Russia. Biden exposes U.S. aims in Ukraine, and his continued work dissecting establishment propaganda on issues such as Russian interference in the U.S. politics or the war in Syria have stood in welcome, often unique contrast to mainstream media. His imperious reporting, his imperious reporting give the lie to the charge of disinformation routinely leveled by those whose nostrums he challenges. His interviews on pushback serve as a model of informative elucidation, as demonstrated in appearances with former Congressman Dennis Kucinich on the collapse of the Progressive Peace Lobby, or with retired Colonel Douglas McGregor on the U.S. military high command's changing views on the Ukraine war. Notably, he has highlighted the role of social media companies in shaping public perceptions of Russian interference, as in his December 18th, 2022 article on Twitter's role in that effort. His reporting of the facts belying the allegation that the Syrian government gassed civilians in Douma in 2018, citing credible evidence from whistleblowers, has been vehemently denounced by the U.S. and other state-supported organs, but never refuted. It is our view that the Pierre Spray would have heartily applauded Mate's work, and that he richly deserves this award. So again, you know, it's just like I told you, the gatekeepers, man. Gatekeepers are not gonna, you know how hard it is to get these awards? But it has already been announced because of the reporting on Syria, because of reporting on Russiagate, because of reporting on the Ukraine war. It has been, you know, it's kind of just like this on the down low thing for the gatekeepers not to give any credit to the Grayzone. Don't shout out the Grayzone. Stay away from the Grayzone. If you ever mention them, you smear the Grayzone. Gatekeepers. Thank you for the super chat, Brock. Democrats pander big time to Black people, then once they're in office, they kick them to the curb. Have you had enough being used? They're going to replace you with these illegals. Love your work. Well, they're not going to replace anybody with illegals. People who are, and I don't like the term illegal, but people who are, not citizens that are undocumented, they can't vote. So just FYI. Thank you for the super chat. Roll that stone. Trump proved to had a better economy already. I don't trust third party to reverse border inflation, war issues, etc. I can't pick a risky third party over Trump that has already had a decent economy. I would tell you not to trust any politician. That's my take on that. I would not trust any politician. Thank you for the super chat, Courtney. RFK Jr. rapping to win the black vote is nothing, but Bill Clinton playing the saxophone to finesse black voters on Arsenio Hall show all over again. Ah, you remember. Kay says the Intercept has Zio ties. Woo. Cassie says it appears Z Squirrel has been suspended again. I have to double check. The Oracle. The real gatekeepers are the mainstream outlets that resist augmenting the profile and legitimacy of independent media. There it is. Sebastian, where's the shout out to Sabby Sabs? Where's the shout out to? I don't know. What do you want me to? Am I supposed to shout out something? I don't know. Cryptic Mystic says Al Jazeera did a segment on the hoax and gave credit to Monda Weiss, Electric Intifada, and the Grayzone. Oh, awesome. That's cool. See, Al Jazeera doing the damn thing. Guru Gee, the bigger Democracy Now! Fail is they ignored the Grayzone when they published their story, and Skahil was embarrassing. Now I wonder about his other stories. I don't know how else to say that, but thank you for the super chat, New York Varsity. This is like Christian Smalls putting in the work and AOC jumping in front of the crowd for the pick. That's funny. Some weasel-ish by Ryan right now. I'll tell you, man, gatekeeping. They smile in your face all the time. They want to take your place. Gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. It's actually called backstabbers, but I changed the word. Thank you for the super chat, New York. This is an interception that will be called back. And thank you, Ronwell. Happy advanced B-Day, Sabs. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, almost that B-Day song. Famo says Sab karaoke. yeah, karaoke, man. I know, I love that song, Sleepy Josh. I love it. Smile in your face. I'll take the tip on Rockfin, Eric. All the time they want to take your place. Thank you for the tip, JVB on Rockfin. Thanks for the reminder, Eric T. Thank you so much. And thank you for the Rumble rant. Wolves are cool. Ilhan at Town Hall was asked if she endorses Biden. Interesting. I have to check that. And thank you for this too. 3 Norfolk Southern trains collided in Pennsylvania. Where is Mayor Pete? Nowhere to be found, I'm sure. Our infrastructure needs some work. That's for real. And I think, one more. Thank you for the super chat, Dwight. I don't sear with party with plan to create more housing, which is what's needed to lower pricing. Interesting. Thank you for that. All right, guys. That's it. It's a wrap for me, fam. I'll be back Tuesday night. And yes, my birthday is this week. I won't be live on my birthday. So I'm actually going to be heading to New York Thursday and going to have some fun there for my birthday. So I'll be having a birthday weekend just to get out of here for a bit. Get out of here for a bit. All right, guys, that's it for me. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.